Hi there and welcome to this week's vlog. The Gospels are great. There's some fantastic accounts of Jesus interacting, meeting with a whole range of people from all backgrounds, different stratas of society, different conditions, different needs. It's just fascinating to read how Jesus responds to each situation in different ways. One of the great stories, of course, is the story of the little man Zacchaeus. Remember as a child singing that song that says Zacchaeus was a very little man, etc., etc. Won't shock you by singing it all, because I'm not a great singer. Anyway, Zacchaeus, Jesus was with, as usual, crowds walking through Jericho, and Zacchaeus is a tax collector, hated by most of society because the tax collectors were in league with the Roman occupiers, hated by the people, but the tax collectors were taxing money sometimes, taxing too much so they could put some in their own pockets, and so tax collectors had a very, very bad reputation. But here was Zacchaeus, he was a tax collector. He heard that Jesus was coming to his town and he wanted to see him. So he went to try and see Jesus, but the problem was he was a little lad and he couldn't see over the crowd. So what did he do? He found a tree, climbed up the tree, and to his shock, when Jesus arrived at where he was, he says, Zacchaeus, come on down, I want to come to your house for tea. And Zacchaeus was shocked, but he with joy, he invited Jesus into his home. And I wonder if you've ever, as you've heard that story, you probably heard it many times, have you ever asked yourself what happened when Jesus was with Zacchaeus in Zacchaeus' home? Because afterwards, Zacchaeus was a completely transformed man. He said, well, go back a step, it seems that Zacchaeus had been cheating the people, he'd been building up riches for himself, he'd been in league with the Roman occupiers, and but now he was changed. He'd met with Jesus. Jesus had spent time in his house. So Zacchaeus says, half my fortune I'm going to give away. If I've robbed anybody, I'm going to give them back 4 times over what I've taken from them. That's a dramatic transformation, if ever there was one. But what happened, do you think? We're not told in the Gospels what happened when Jesus was with Zacchaeus in his home. But what do you think happened? I've got a feeling, I can't prove this of course, I've got a feeling that Jesus spent a lot of time simply listening to Zacchaeus. Zacchaeus would pour out his heart, telling Jesus about his life. And I'm sure Jesus would respond with words that really touched Zacchaeus' heart. But Jesus' love for this man who was hated by most people transformed his life. And meeting with Jesus is a life-transforming thing in our lives. Now, I tell that story, I remind you of that story, because I was reading another verse earlier this week. I have the Bible app on my phone, and each day there is a verse to meditate on, and somebody kind of talks about that verse. It's really good. If you're interested, the Bible app is really well worth it. Anyway, the verse from one day this week was James chapter 1 verse 19. Excuse me. James says, my dear brothers and sisters, take note of this. In other words, this is important. Everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry. I'm sure we've all come across people who are not really good listeners. You say something to me, you know they haven't heard what you've said. I remember some years ago when I was still in the full-time ministry, somebody in leadership in the local churches came and said that, I've come to just spend time with you, a pastoral conversation, to listen to you. And that person actually spent most of the time talking about themselves, not listening to me. So do we spend time, or do we take time to listen, actually really listen to people, to hear what they're saying? Maybe not just the words that they say, but what what lies underneath it? Do we devote time to people? Do we stop for the person in front of us and give them our attention, our time? Are we good listeners? You've heard it said, I'm sure, that God gave us 2 ears but only 1 mouth, and that gives us an idea that he wants us to be good listeners rather than spend all the time speaking. So quick to listen. I think I'm pretty sure that I heard some years ago a group of prostitutes were interviewed and they were asked the kind of questions about what would you really like in your life, and I'm sure that one of the answers came back, somebody to just listen to me. How many people do we know who never really have anybody who will listen to them, truly listen? Quick to listen, slow to speak. So don't bombard people with our speech, our ideas, our language, our story. Yes, if somebody asks us, we respond, we tell them. But don't pour words over a person. Be ready to listen to them as well as speak. And then slow to become angry. I struggle with that. Sometimes respond in a wrong way. When somebody upsets me, or when I'm in a conversation with Sue, my wife, and we don't agree, sometimes I respond in a way that's not gracious, not kind. Get worked up too quickly instead of taking a step back and truly listening to what the other person is saying. I'm sure that when we think about the major issues in the world today, the big problems, the conflicts, much of it is at the heart, and you could go down on a personal level to conflicts in marriage, in family life, in relationships, in friendships. It's because we're not listening to the other person. We're trying to press our thoughts, our ideas on that person without listening to what they're saying. And we quickly allow ourselves to become angry. And when we're angry, well, we sometimes act in a way or say things that we later regret. So try and remain at peace, not allow ourselves to be angry and instantly react, but take time to listen, to think, to consider, to pray. Jesus was obviously a great listener, as well as someone who spoke powerful words from God. So there's just something to reflect on. I've been reflecting on it. Let's listen again to the words of James. My dear brothers and sisters, take note of this. Be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry. May God, through his Spirit, help us to listen to those words and put them into practice in our lives. God bless you. Thank you so much for listening today.